Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about the altcoin market, and we're going to try to better understand the moves that will likely happen. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Now, generally speaking, with altcoins, to be successful in crypto, if you're new, there's going to be a lot of new people watching. So the first thing with altcoins to be successful in the cryptoverse is to disregard their USD valuation. Pretend like it doesn't exist. Because frankly, it doesn't matter. What's more important is their Bitcoin valuation, right? That's what we care about. Because if you're in crypto, you more than likely see a reason for Bitcoin, and I imagine at some point or another you've owned Bitcoin, and so there's this idea that fiat, the purchasing power of fiat, is asymptotically going to zero. We know that, right? We know that. I mean, if you look over a long enough period of time, the purchasing power of US dollars goes to zero, right? That's why things just become more and more expensive as the years go by. So we already know that the denominator, when you look at all USD pairs, the denominator is already dropping, right? It's already dropping. So why look at the USD valuation of something when we already know that USD is going to go asymptotically to zero over a long enough period of time? Why not look at their valuations compared to the king of the cryptoverse, Bitcoin? And so when I talk about altcoins, I'm almost always exclusively looking at them in terms of either their Bitcoin valuation or their Ethereum valuation. I don't really care about any other valuation for alts. I want to know what they're doing against Bitcoin and what they're doing against Ethereum. If they're bleeding to either one of those, then they're not worth the risk in the same way as if they were actually in an uptrend against any of them, right? So over the last several years, you'll notice that altcoins have continued to bleed against Bitcoin, right? They are down from the highs in 2021. They're currently down about 61% from those highs. They have gone all the way down to about 69% down, right? So altcoins have bled out a lot against Bitcoin. We know that, right? We know that. And for a long time, when we were talking about, this market, we've obviously spent a ton of time talking about Bitcoin dominance, right? We've spent a lot of time talking about Bitcoin dominance. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about are sort of these major pivot levels for Bitcoin dominance, right? And the pivot levels for Bitcoin dominance are the fib retracement levels, right? And I know not everyone will buy into this, but if you look at where Bitcoin dominance topped last cycle and then take this down, what you'll notice is that all the major resistance points for Bitcoin dominance have been at these fib levels, right? They've been at these fib levels, and that's where Bitcoin dominance finds resistance. And then eventually it breaks through. But these are the main areas that Bitcoin dominance finds resistance. It was at these major fib levels. And so what we said was to expect a rejection last year, a local top at 60%, and then again at 66%. Okay? Now, in the short term, as I have stated, the most likely outcome for altcoins in August is to rally against Bitcoin, right? That's the most likely outcome. We have to be objective. It has nothing to do with what you want, what I want. Don't trade the market you want, trade the market that you have. And so what I've said is that altcoins will likely rally against Bitcoin through late August. Okay? So you see altcoins going up right now. That's in line with what we've talked about, right? We've talked a lot about this move by altcoins, Bitcoin dominance finding resistance at 66%. That was always that main target. ETH Bitcoin has likely bottomed already. The valuation of ETH against Bitcoin for this market cycle, I think ETH has already bottomed. And then the question remains, well, where are alts going to go from here? My general thought process, again, is that altcoins will likely rally against Bitcoin for about 1 to 2 more weeks. I don't know exactly how high they're going to go. There exists a scenario where they go up a lot more before they roll over. In fact, in 2017, they rallied from about this same level at the same time, right? They hit around this same level in July. Same idea here, just in June. And then back then, they rallied all the way up to 0.55. And they did so by the end of August. So there exists a scenario where that happens, right? Where altcoins rally against Bitcoin. Now, what I've had a lot of people ask me this question. They're like, well, you know, how like why are you not talking about altcoins when they're getting this rally? And it's a fair question, right? But my primary reasoning, and something's about to change, my primary reasoning for sort of the disinterest I've had in the altcoin market hasn't been because they've been bleeding against Bitcoin since April, right? Which technically speaking, they're basically at the same level they were at in April against Bitcoin. I was disinterested in altcoins, throughout this entire phase. But the main reason I continued the disinterest in April was not because of their Bitcoin valuation. It was because Ethereum went home in April. And when Ethereum goes home on its USD pair, the reason why we look at the USD pair for Ethereum in that case is because when Ethereum goes home on its USD valuation, that's when ETH typically bottoms against Bitcoin. So again, if you overlay ETH Bitcoin with ETH USD, you'll see that when ETH USD goes home, that's when ETH bottoms against Bitcoin. The blue line is ETH Bitcoin. Same thing, right? This is when it bottoms against Bitcoin. Same thing here, right? So when Ethereum goes home, it's regression man. That's when ETH bottoms against Bitcoin. When ETH bottoms against Bitcoin, ETH then starts to lead, okay? When Ethereum starts to lead, altcoins go up against Bitcoin, but the reason they go up against Bitcoin is because Ethereum is going up against Bitcoin. Do you guys remember in 2023, 2024, when Ethereum was going up on its USD valuation, but it was bleeding against Bitcoin? The only reason Ethereum was going up back then was because Bitcoin was dragging it. The main reason that altcoins are going up right now on their Bitcoin pairs, in my opinion, is because Ethereum is dragging them, right? It's dragging them higher. And so when you actually value altcoins on their Ethereum valuation, you can see they've been bleeding almost nonstop since April, right? Since Ethereum went home on its USD valuation, altcoins have been bleeding. So I have a lot of people out there being like, well, Ben, look, altcoins are doing great right now, right? They're doing great. Why are you not talking about them? You're only talking about Bitcoin and Ethereum. But the reason is because Bitcoin is king at all times, even for the brief alt seasons that we get. Bitcoin is always king, and nothing's going to change that. And the other reason is because Ethereum, in my opinion, is lower risk than altcoins in general. And altcoins collectively have been bleeding to Ethereum almost nonstop since April. Now, I think that when after Ethereum makes new all-time highs, so whenever Ethereum passes the prior all-time high, it's getting close. Whenever it passes the prior all-time high, I think alts on their ETH pairs will bounce, okay? So I think there's going to be some type of mean reversion. You could even argue we're getting pretty close to it. Maybe we just see this thing wick down like it did back over here before it bounces back up. But I think as Ethereum makes new all-time highs, that will likely cause altcoins to bounce on their Ether valuations. All right? Now, what does that mean for their Bitcoin valuations? Well, as I said, I think alts will do well against Bitcoin for the rest of August. Okay? The reason why there is a reason to be somewhat cautious about the idea of it continuing beyond August in the short. I'm not saying they can't go higher for the rest of the cycle. I'm just saying I think in September, we're going to see Bitcoin dominance start to go back up temporarily. Now, let's look at a couple of examples to support that idea. All right. So, number one, when you look at Bitcoin dominance, you can see that we're getting kind of close to this trend line where I think it might bounce off of. But the bigger thing to keep in mind is that whatever direction Bitcoin dominance is going before September, it tends to reverse course after September. Now, you might not believe me, but let's just take a look. You see this big change in direction right here in September of 2020? Bitcoin dominance went down into September, and then see the bottom for dominance right here. It was late August, the week of August 31st. Bitcoin dominance then bottomed out. It might have, yeah. Bitcoin dominance then bottomed out, and then it went back up, and it swept the prior all-time high on a Bitcoin USD rally, right? But what you'll notice is that this change in the trend occurred in September. If you go back to 2017, there was also a change in the trend, and you can see alts where Bitcoin dominance was going down, but then you can see that a bottom formed late August, and then Bitcoin dominance rallied back up before then falling off a cliff. You see that? But do you see how it reversed course in September? So now you draw a line at September and you see the same thing. You can see that going into September, Bitcoin dominance was going down, and then it reversed course after it. Now, let's just draw a line at every September just to see if what I say holds. There was also a time in 2019 where Bitcoin dominance was going up into September, and then you can see then it got a big drop, right? Bitcoin dominance dropped from like 61% all the way down to 51%, but it was going up into September. If you look at September of 2019, Bitcoin dominance was going up into it, and then following September, it went down, right? So you have September 2017, you have September 2018, September 2019, September 2020. Now look at September 2021. Same thing. Bitcoin dominance went down into September, but then it got a bounce on the other side of it, right? It bounced back up on the other side of that. 2022, what happened? Bitcoin dominance was going down, and then guess where it bottomed? Late August, early September, and then you can see it started to bounce from there. So there's so many different examples throughout history where whatever direction Bitcoin dominance was going before September, it then reversed after it. So what I think is the most likely outcome here, I think Ethereum will print new all-time highs, okay? I think that when it does, I think that alts will likely get a rebound on their ETH pairs. So I would expect a mean reversion by alt-ETH pairs, where they're likely going to do something like this. Go down a little bit more until Ethereum makes those all-time highs, rally back up, and whenever they get that rally, you're likely going to see them, get a nice move back up to the upside against ETH. That is what I'm thinking is going to happen. But the problem is that when that happens, if Ethereum starts to go down on its Bitcoin valuation in September, then alts will likely go down on their Bitcoin valuations in September. Because remember, the only reason altcoins are going up against Bitcoin is because Ethereum is going up against Bitcoin. If Ethereum starts to go down against Bitcoin next month, then I think alt will likely follow suit. All right? Now, look, guys, there is a difference between being right and making money. I'm not here to tell you that you can't buy altcoins because they might bleed against Bitcoin next month. In the short term, they're likely going to rally against Bitcoin. Okay? So again, there's a difference between being right and making money. In this video, I'm trying to focus on what is likely going to happen. It's up to you to trade how you want to trade. I'm just trying to show you what I think is the most likely path. And so that timing these rotations can actually be quite good, right? I mean, imagine if you just bought Ethereum in April and ignored altcoins. Ethereum has gone up way more than most altcoins. Yes, altcoins are doing great right now, but they're still bleeding against Ethereum, right? And that's the problem. So what I think, and here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. When Bitcoin breaks to all-time highs each cycle, or every few months or whatever, we tend to see alts rally on their Bitcoin pairs, right? So if you look here, like the last couple of years, you see these times where Bitcoin breaks through. And then right here, every single time that has happened has corresponded to Bitcoin dominance dropping, right? So right here, when Bitcoin USD broke out, Bitcoin dominance dropped. Here, when Bitcoin USD broke out, Bitcoin dominance dropped. And then again here, when Bitcoin USD broke out, Bitcoin dominance dropped. So we know that whenever Bitcoin breaks out of a long consolidation period, Bitcoin dominance drops, right? We know that. Yeah, that's been pretty clear for a while. But the thing to consider is that when it drops, you can see it drop, and then after it drops, then Bitcoin USD at some point gets a correction, right? It gets a correction, just like here. And during that correction or consolidation, Bitcoin dominance then starts to regroup, right? It starts to regroup, and then starts to show strength again, and then it tries to, continue the trend. So the one thing to remember here, if you go look at monthly returns for Bitcoin, normally in post-halving years, Bitcoin is green in both July and August, right? So you can see in 2013, July and August was green. In 2017, July and August was green. In 2021, July and August was green. And in 2025, July and August were potentially green, right? July is already green. Hopefully August is too. The thing is that in 2013, September was red, and in 2017, September was red, and in 2021, September was red. And so I'm suspecting that in 2025, we'll likely see a red September followed by a green October. Now, when that correction happens for Bitcoin, which hopefully happens from a much higher price than we are right now, when that correction happens in about 2 to 3 weeks, it's likely going to cause Bitcoin dominance to start finding strength again. Okay, now between now and then, altcoins still have the green light to rally on their Bitcoin pairs, and they'll likely have the green light to rally on their ETH pairs after Ethereum hits new all-time highs. But look at what happened in 2023. You can see that alts rallied back up, and then they sort of bled. Look at this. Look at when they topped here against Bitcoin, right? Late August, right? So you have late August of 2023. In 2022, you can see that all Bitcoin pairs rallied until about late August, early September. Look at 2020, right? All Bitcoin pairs, they rallied into late August. 2017, alts rallied against Bitcoin into late August. Now, I don't know if it is true every year, but we can go take a look. If you look at 2021, you can see that all Bitcoin pairs rallied into early September, right? Around the same time before they got a decisive correction. So let's see, we've covered 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. Yeah, I mean, they kind of found a low around early August. They started to move up in August. They found a high in September before dropping. Okay? If we go back even further, 2019, you can see that alt Bitcoin pairs were going down into this time frame, and so they then reversed course. It goes back to that Bitcoin dominance thing we talked about, right? Whatever direction they're going before September, they tend to reverse course after September. So since they're going up now, it makes me think that in September we'll likely see them start to show a little bit of weakness again on their Bitcoin pairs, though they might show strength on their ETH pairs. Am I suggesting that you should not own any altcoins? No, I'm not talking about your altcoins. I'm sure your altcoins are already outperforming Bitcoin and Ethereum. I'm talking about everyone else's alts. So I could see a scenario where alt Bitcoin pairs, rally anywhere, right? Anywhere in this box, right? And then likely roll over September, October, before then probably going back up again around November. A lot of this also has to do with this idea that alt Bitcoin pairs go to the range lows eventually. And a lot of people say that that's not going to happen. And look, maybe they're right. I've been right about certain things this cycle, wrong about others. I tend to think that this is likely going to repeat itself, where you'll see alt Bitcoin pairs go to the range lows, just like they did last cycle, and just like they did the cycle before. I think that's the most likely outcome. But I don't think it's going to happen yet. I think that for the rest of August, alts will likely remain strong against Bitcoin. Arguably, we are right here, right? This is also mid-August of 2017. That's arguably where we are right now, right? So maybe we're about halfway through the current move before then they roll over in September and crash back down on their Bitcoin pairs. If you look at 2020, you can see what happened, right? Alt Bitcoin pairs rallied into August, right? They were basically the same level almost that they are right now, and then they still dropped going into Q4. So again, if you look at either of these bar patterns on altcoins, right? And you just kind of look at it compared to now, you can kind of see what I'm talking about, right? Like, I'm not saying they can't rally on their Bitcoin pairs. They probably will until Ethereum, until ETH Bitcoin starts to get a big drop. But look at that one, and then also look at 2020, right? You can see they also had a similar type of move, right? Where they had this rally. And by the way, there's like a glitch in the data here, right? So it's kind of, it's not really real because I think they changed the definition of how they calculated this. So you can see it just kind of glitched up from 0.31 to 0.36 at some point. So, that's something to keep in mind. But if you just look at it like that, you can kind of see how, alt Bitcoin pairs, they get their rally into late August, they roll over September, October, and then maybe they get their larger rally starting in, a little bit later, like a couple months later. So the other thing to think about is that we know that altcoins start outperforming Bitcoin whenever Bitcoin makes it to new cycle highs. So there's an idea of, well, what happens if Ethereum makes it to new cycle highs? Will altcoins rally against Bitcoin? The answer in the short term is likely yes. Why? Because they're likely going to stay strong through the end of August, and Ethereum's hopefully going to put in new all-time highs relatively soon. But the one thing I think that could happen here is you get a sort of a fake alt season where people scream alt season again for about 2 weeks before they recognize once again that it's not actually alt season. The reason I think that is because I think the most likely outcome here is for Ethereum to run the highs and then get a pullback in September. So altcoins, when they see this rally by Ethereum, they're going to want to break out, right? They're going to want to break out and move up. But then I think Ethereum is going to get a timely correction in September, which is going to bring it back below the prior all-time high. And when that happens, I think that alt Bitcoin pairs will then have their own correction too, right? They'll be like, oh, it was a fake breakout. Now, after that, I still think Ethereum will likely find support at the bull market support band and go right back up. And potentially on that move, you might actually finally get the move that everyone has been waiting for by altcoins. But I do think there is a reality that you could see sort of a fake breakout by Ethereum before the real breakout by Ethereum. Look at what happened last cycle around the same time, right? Ethereum was rallying, and it rallied on up to this level, right? Like right here, and it moved up a little bit, and then it got that correction, right? As it hit that prior cycle high. Look actually from this cycle, right? Look at it from the prior all-time high 2018. Ethereum rallied above it, and then it got a sharp correction back down. Okay? That correction back down, when that happens, I think in September, I think that's going to be why all Bitcoin pairs get their own sharp correction. It's because when Ethereum, it might rally above it, but then I think it's going to get a sharp correction, within a couple of weeks, right? Probably sometime in September. Okay? That's my base case. Maybe you disagree with it. That's my base case. Look at the altcoin market on the USD pair, because I know some of you guys still only care about this despite my attempts to try to get you to not care about it. If you look at it, if you look at total 3, you can see that the first time that it approached the prior highs, like it went above the prior high, and then it still got a correction back down. So a lot of times after an asset sweeps a prior high, it'll get a correction before then trying again. And this has happened a lot. Look at Solana, right? I know a lot of you guys own Solana. Let's not pretend like you don't. And look at what happened when it swept the high. You see that? You see how it like sweeps the high and then gets this correction? So I think the reason why the altcoin rally will likely end against Bitcoin in about 2 weeks is because I think Ethereum will likely get a correction back down below the all-time highs in September. So past the all-time highs in August, drop in September back below the all-time highs, which will spook the altcoins into once again falling for sort of this like alt season call. And they're like, oh crap, it's not alt season. People just fell for it once again. And if that happens, right, if altcoins get that drop after Ethereum sweeps the all-time high, I think that could finally, be the reason for why all Bitcoin pairs get that final, correction in sort of that October, the September-October timeframe, right? September-October, same thing right here, like September-October. That's why I think you'll get that, that sort of that next correction by all Bitcoin pairs, is because I think it's going to coincide with after Ethereum breaks to all-time highs. I think you'll get that correction by Ethereum in September, which will then cause all Bitcoin pairs to then drop again. And then the issue with when that happens is that when the market drops like that, Bitcoin normally recovers first, because it represents the best of the cryptoverse, right? People feel safer in Bitcoin than most everything else. So if Bitcoin does get a correction in September, if it starts to go back up in October, it'll likely, lead the altcoin market, right? It'll probably go up before the altcoin market. And so what happens is that altcoins will then bleed against Bitcoin in September on a Bitcoin correction, and then they'll likely bleed against Bitcoin in October on a Bitcoin rally. Okay? And that is kind of how I see it playing out. So you can get a scenario here where alts still rally against Bitcoin in the short term, right? Even for potentially 2 more weeks. But I still think in about 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at the revenge of Bitcoin dominance. Is it too early right now? I think so, right? I think the base case for now is that alts continue to stay strong against Bitcoin. But 2 weeks from now, I think the rotation to Bitcoin will start. Trade the market that you have, not the one that you want, right? So that's my assessment of how this is going to play out. I know people don't like it, and I could be wrong, but I still stand by the idea that all Bitcoin pairs will go to 0.25. No true sustained alt season has ever happened until that event. Have you had fake alt seasons? Absolutely. Right? Every single one of these moves by altcoins over the last few years has just been a fake rally that made people think it was alt season, but it wasn't actually alt season. And the one we're in right now could very well be the same thing. But I don't think the larger rally by altcoins occurs on their Bitcoin pairs. I don't think that occurs until after all Bitcoin pairs go to the range lows. And I think the most likely time frame for that to occur is late October to early November. That's what I think. Okay? Does that mean you shouldn't hold alts? I didn't say that. I just think that they're likely gonna, they've been bleeding to Ethereum since April. So if you've been focused on Ethereum since April, you haven't missed anything. If you've been focused on Bitcoin for the most of the rest of the cycle, you haven't missed anything, right? Bitcoin and Ethereum have led the way. You can look at Bitcoin dominance plus Ethereum dominance and see exactly what I'm talking about, right? Bitcoin dominance and Ethereum dominance just put in new all-time highs a couple months ago. Not new all-time highs, new cycle highs, right? Just a couple of months ago, they did that. So I think that the most likely outcome is for alts to rally against Bitcoin for the rest of August, or to stay strong against Bitcoin. That doesn't mean that the top has to be the last day of August, so I think they'll stay generally strong against Bitcoin for about 2 more weeks. I think alts will stay weak against Ethereum until Ethereum puts in new all-time highs. And then I think that a correction by Bitcoin USD in September will bring Ethereum back below all-time highs, which will then make people believe it's not alt season again, right? Alts will then drop against Bitcoin and then theoretically go to the range lows by late October or early November at the latest. That is how I think this is going to play out. A lot of people disagree with me, and that is fine. There's a decent chance I'm wrong. But again, that's how I think this is going to play out. And we'll see it. We'll see if it happens. In the short term, I'm not going to fade this alt Bitcoin rally because I think the most likely outcome is that they rally against Bitcoin for the next week or two. But in about 2 weeks, I'm going to become very deterministic about a Bitcoin dominance rally. And I might be wrong about it, but I'll be here to be deterministic about it. And we'll talk more about Bitcoin dominance then. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. And again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.